The crackle of the fire was the only sound left in the world. Outside, a blizzard was trying to erase the cabin from the face of the earth. Inside, I was stranded with the one person I should never have been alone with, my best friend's mom. The power was out. The phones were dead, and the look in her eyes wasn't one of a parent anymore. It was the raw, terrifying look of a woman seeing a man for the very first time. This is the story of that night. A single, stolen moment that fractured my life into a before and an after, and taught me that some secrets are too warm to ever leave you, even in the coldest of winters. The trouble with life is that the moments that break you never announce themselves with a fanfare. They creep up on you, disguised as ordinary days. 2 weeks before the cabin, I was in Jake's backyard, flipping burgers on a propane grill while he held court at the patio table, explaining to a captivated audience of our friends why his new startup was a guaranteed ticket to early retirement. The Colorado sun was warm on my back, the beer in my hand was cold, and everything was exactly as it should be. That's when Sonia emerged from the house, carrying a large bowl of potato salad. She moved with a quiet grace that always seemed slightly out of place in Jake's boisterous world. She was in her late 40s, but had a timeless elegance that made her seem ageless. Her dark hair, streaked with a few deliberate strands of silver, was pulled back in a loose knot. She wore a simple linen dress, and as she set the bowl down, she caught my eye and offered a small, polite smile. "Need a refill, Leo?" she asked, her voice as calm and steady as ever. "I'm good, Sonia, thanks." I gave her my standard, reliable smile, the one I'd been giving her for a decade. She nodded and turned to attend to the other guests. I watched her for a moment, this woman I thought I knew. For 10 years, since Jake and I became inseparable in college, she had been a constant, pleasant background presence. The maker of epic Thanksgiving dinners, the silent financial supporter during our lean post-grad years, the voice of gentle reason when Jake's schemes got too outlandish. She was Jake's mom, a title that came with a predefined set of interactions. Be respectful, be helpful, be grateful. But that day, something felt different. I noticed the slight tension in her shoulders as Jake launched into another loud story. I saw the way her smile didn't quite reach her eyes when someone asked about her ex-husband, Mark. I saw the quiet sadness she carried, a weight that her elegant posture couldn't completely conceal. It was the first time I didn't just see Jake's mom. I saw Sonia, a person, separate and whole. The plan for the cabin trip was Jake's idea, of course. A managing director's retreat, he'd called it, puffing out his chest, even though his company was currently just him and a freelance graphic designer in Prague. He'd booked a remote cabin in the Rockies for his birthday weekend. "Just the guys?" I'd asked, envisioning 3 days of beer, poker, and hiking. "Well," Jake had said, uncharacteristically hesitant, "I kind of invited my mom." I'd blinked. "Your mom?" "Yeah, you've seen her, Leo. She's been quiet since the divorce. She just putters around the house. I think she's lonely. I thought some fresh air, some time away. It might do her good." "You don't mind, do you?" What could I say? "No, of course not. It'll be great." And I'd meant it. Or I'd thought I did. It was just Sonia. It would be fine. The drive up to the mountains was beautiful, the aspen trees blazing gold against a crisp blue sky. Jake drove, his perpetual podcast on the speakers, while I rode shotgun. Sonia sat in the back, mostly silent, looking out the window. I'd catch glimpses of her reflection in the rearview mirror, her profile thoughtful, almost melancholic. We stopped at a small general store in a dusty little town at the foot of the mountain to get the last of our supplies. While Jake argued with the store owner about the best brand of firewood starter, I found myself next to Sonia in the canned goods aisle. "He means well," she said softly, not looking at me. "Jake? He always does. It's one of his better qualities." She finally turned her head, her green eyes meeting mine. "He's a lot like his father. All big gestures and big energy. It can be exhausting to keep up with." It was a startlingly frank admission. I just nodded, not sure how to respond. My eyes dropped to the shopping basket she was holding. Her hands were slender, her fingers long. On her right hand, a pale band of skin marked where her wedding ring had been for 20 years. "You're not wearing it," I said before I could stop myself. She followed my gaze, flexing her hand slightly. No, she said, her voice barely a whisper. It felt like time. Jake boomed from the front of the store, breaking the moment. All right, team, we're stocked up and ready for conquest. On to the cabin. Sonia gave me one last, unreadable look before turning and walking toward her son. I stood alone for a moment in the aisle, the ghost of that pale band on her finger imprinted on my mind. The cabin was exactly as advertised: rustic, charming, and isolated. It was nestled in a dense grove of pine trees, with a wraparound porch and a massive stone chimney. The first evening was pleasant. We built a fire, Jake grilled steaks, and we played cards. Sonia seemed to relax, even laughing at one of Jake's ridiculous jokes, a real musical sound that I realized I hadn't heard in years. I went to bed that night in a small room under the eaves, listening to the absolute silence of the wilderness. My last thought before sleep took me was of Sonia's laugh, and how it had, for a moment, completely erased the quiet sadness from her eyes. I fell asleep to the sound of a gentle wind in the pines. I had no idea it was the beginning of the scream. The change was audible. I woke not to silence, but to a low, menacing moan. The wind. It was whipping around the cabin, rattling the window panes. I got out of bed and peered through the frost-tinged glass. Where there had been a forest, there was now a swirling, blinding wall of white. Well, this is epic, Jake announced at breakfast, peering out the window with boyish excitement. They said maybe a few inches. This looks like a foot already. Sonia was quieter, sipping her coffee, her brow furrowed. The road back is steep, Jake. We should keep an eye on it. By noon, there were 2 feet of snow. The moan of the wind had escalated into a full-throated roar. The sky was a uniform, oppressive gray, so low it felt like you could touch it. The power flickered once, twice, and then died with a final, pathetic sigh. The fun, adventurous atmosphere evaporated, replaced by a creeping unease. We were down to the firelight and a few battery-powered lanterns. Jake, ever the man of action, tried his phone. No service, nothing. He dug out a bulky satellite phone from his gear bag. Aha, the old emergency beacon. Pricey, but worth it for, well, emergencies. He managed to get a weak signal and called the rental agency. The conversation was brief and grim. They said the storm is worse than predicted, a once-in-a-generation event. The plows won't be up this way for days. They said to sit tight. Days? Sonia's voice was calm, but I could hear the thin wire of anxiety running through it. The rest of the day was a lesson in monotony and growing tension. We played every card game we knew. We told stories. We listened to the radio on Jake's emergency kit, the staticky voice of a broadcaster listing road closures and warning people to stay indoors. The world was shrinking to the 4 walls of the cabin. It was on the second morning, with the snow still falling relentlessly, that Jake made his decision. He'd been pacing by the window like a caged animal. This is ridiculous, he muttered. I'm going to try to hike out to the main road. It's only 5 miles. I can get a signal, call someone, get an update at least. Jake, no, Sonia said, standing up. Her voice was sharp, maternal. That's insane. You can't see 10 feet in front of you out there. Mom, I'll be fine. I'm not some city kid. I know what I'm doing. I'll follow the road. I'll be back in a few hours. He was already pulling on his layers, his movements brisk with purpose. I felt a knot of dread tighten in my stomach. Jake, she's right. It's not worth the risk. Risk? He grinned, that same reckless grin that had gotten us into and out of trouble since we were 18. This is an adventure, Leo. Don't worry. I'll send a rescue party for you too. He winked, completely missing the look of sheer terror on his mother's face. He bundled up, gave his mom a quick, confident hug, and clapped me on the shoulder. Hold down the fort. Keep the home fires burning. And then he was gone. The door opened. A blast of frigid air and swirling snow invaded the cabin, and then it closed, swallowing him whole. The silence he left behind was heavier and more profound than any we had experienced so far. Sonia stood frozen, staring at the door. I went to the window, wiping away the condensation, but I saw nothing, just white. The hours that followed were the longest of my life. The fire seemed to burn lower. The cold seeped in more aggressively. We didn't speak much. What was there to say? Every creak of the cabin, every howl of the wind, was a potential omen. Then, a sound. Not the wind. A faint, electronic warble. The satellite phone. Sonia and I both jumped. She reached it first, fumbling with the buttons. "Jake? Jake, are you there?" The voice that came through was fragmented, distorted by static and wind. "Mom, Leo, stay put, truck, found me. Frostbite, hospital in town, I'm safe, storm, days, you're stuck." "Jake, Jake, we can't hear you," I said, leaning close to the speaker. "Love you. Stay safe." A final burst of static, and then the line went dead. The little light on the phone blinked from green to red. The battery was dead. Sonia slowly lowered the phone, her hand trembling. She looked at me, her face pale, her eyes wide with a storm of emotions: relief that he was safe, terror that we were now truly, completely alone. The awkwardness descended instantly, a thick, uncomfortable blanket. We were no longer a group of three, with Jake as our loud, chaotic anchor. We were two, Leo and Sonia, son's friend and best friend's mom. The definitions of our relationship were suddenly stark and inadequate. "Well," I said, my voice sounding horribly bright in the gloom, "he's safe. That's the main thing." "Yes," she whispered, not looking at me. "That's the main thing." I busied myself with the fire, adding more logs until the flames roared, trying to push back the cold and the strange new silence. She moved to the small kitchen area and began mechanically organizing the canned goods, her back to me. We orbited each other like this for hours. Two satellites whose central planet had suddenly vanished. We were careful, polite, and utterly distant. I told her about my latest coding project in excessive detail. She told me about a book she was reading. The conversations were hollow, just noise to fill the terrifying void. As the second day of our stranding turned to night, the temperature plummeted. The fire was our only defense, and I tended to it with a fervent, focused intensity. The woodpile on the porch was shrinking alarmingly. I bundled up and ventured out into the maelstrom to bring in as much as I could, the snow instantly caking on my eyelashes, the cold stealing my breath. When I stumbled back inside, shivering violently, Sonia was there with a blanket. She helped me off with my coat, her hands brushing snow from my shoulders. "Thank you, Leo," she said, her voice soft, "for doing that." Her touch, even through layers of clothing, was electric. I just nodded, unable to speak, and moved to the fire to warm my frozen hands. We ate a dinner of cold beans and crackers in silence, sitting on the rug before the fireplace. The wind screamed its outrage at the world. The fire was the only thing that stood between us and the frozen dark. It was in this fragile, pressurized space that the walls finally began to crack. It started with a shiver, a full-body tremor that ran through Sonia as she sat wrapped in her blankets. I saw it from the corner of my eye. "You're cold," I said. It wasn't a question. "I'm fine," she replied. But her teeth were on the verge of chattering. The gentlemanly thing, the son's friend thing, would have been to offer her my blanket or to stoke the fire higher. But something else, a deeper, more primal instinct, took over. I didn't think. I just moved. I shifted closer to her on the rug, closing the few feet that separated us. I didn't look at her, just stared into the flames. But I could feel the heat of her body, could hear the slight catch in her breath. I settled next to her, our shoulders almost, but not quite, touching. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't empty or awkward. It was charged, like the air before a lightning strike. "I used to love the snow," she said after a long while, her voice a low murmur that seemed to blend with the fire's crackle. "When Jake was little, we'd build forts. Mark would be traveling for work, and it would be just us. We'd have hot chocolate and watch the snow fall. It felt safe, enclosed. What does it feel like now?" I asked quietly. She was silent for so long I thought she hadn't heard me. Then, "It feels like a cage, a very beautiful, very quiet cage." And that's when the real confession began. It wasn't planned. It was drawn out of us by the isolation, by the intimate danger, by the hypnotic dance of the flames. She talked about her marriage, not with venom, but with a profound, weary sadness. She spoke of the slow, imperceptible erosion of herself, of years spent being Mark's wife and Jake's mom, until the person she was at 20, the woman who wanted to be a painter, who loved indie rock and wanted to travel to Croatia, had simply faded away, like a photograph left in the Sunday. He didn't mean to do it, she said, her eyes fixed on the fire. Mark, he's not a villain. He's just loud. His dreams, his ambitions, his life, they just took up all the oxygen in the room. After a while, you stop trying to breathe for yourself. It's easier. I listened, utterly captivated. This was the real Sonia, the one hidden beneath the polite smiles and the capable motherly exterior. She was showing me the cracks in her foundation, and it was the most vulnerable, most beautiful thing I had ever witnessed. Then it was my turn. The words tumbled out, things I'd never said to anyone, not even to Jake. I know what you mean, I began, my voice rough. About the oxygen. I'm the steady one, the reliable one. For my parents, I'm the success story. The son who never got in trouble, who got a good, sensible job. For Jake, I'm the brother he never had, the anchor that keeps him from floating away on his big ideas. I'm the friend people call when they need to move a couch, or when their computer crashes. I'm a function, a role. But sometimes I look in the mirror, and I don't know who's looking back. I feel like I'm a supporting character in everyone else's life, and I forgot to write my own part. I risked a glance at her. She was looking at me now, her full attention on me. Her green eyes were wide, reflecting the fire, and in them, I saw no pity, no judgment. I saw recognition. I see you, I said, and the words felt like a vow, torn from the very core of my being. Her breath hitched. What? I see you, Sonia. My voice grew stronger, more sure. I see the way you always make sure everyone else has a drink before you pour your own. I see the little frown you get when you're reading a book you love, like you're having a silent argument with the author. I see the way you hum old Pixies songs when you're washing dishes, thinking no one's listening. I see the strength it took for you to walk away from a marriage that was making you disappear. I see you. It was as if I had pulled a loose thread and her entire composed facade unraveled. A single, perfect tear escaped the corner of her eye and traced a slow path down her cheek. She made no move to wipe it away. She just looked at me, her lips slightly parted, her entire being focused on mine. No one's seen me in a very long time, she breathed, her voice thick with emotion. The space between us vanished. It wasn't a decision. It was a gravitational pull. I moved closer, my heart hammering against my ribs like a wild thing. I reached out, my hand trembling not from the cold, but from the sheer magnitude of the moment. I gently, so gently, wiped the tear from her cheek with my thumb. Her skin was impossibly soft and warm from the fire. She leaned into my touch, her eyes fluttering closed for a second. It was a surrender, a silent permission. Sonia, I whispered, her name a prayer on this altar of fire and snow. I leaned in slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, to rebuild the walls, to be Jake's mom again. But she didn't. She met me halfway. The kiss was not frantic or desperate. It was slow, searching, and devastatingly tender. It was a conversation without words. It was the acknowledgement of two people who had been unseen, finding a mirror in each other's souls. Her lips were soft and tasted faintly of salt and the black tea she'd been drinking. I brought my hand up to cradle her jaw, and she melted into me, her own hand coming to rest on my chest, over my thundering heart. I could feel the rapid, bird-like flutter of her pulse beneath my fingers. The world, with its blizzards and its responsibilities, its past and its uncertain future, ceased to exist. There was only the soft crackle of the fire, the warmth of her skin under my fingers, the scent of pine and coffee on her skin, and the profound, soul-deep rightness of the connection arcing between us. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathless. We didn't speak. Words would have been a desecration of the silence. She simply rested her forehead against mine, her eyes closed, her breath mingling with mine in the small, warm space between our faces. I draped my jacket over her shoulders, and she smiled then, a real, full, unguarded smile that transformed her entire face, lighting her up from within. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. We spent the rest of the night like that, wrapped in blankets and each other, talking in hushed tones. We talked about our dreams, her secret desire to open a small art gallery, my half-formed idea of quitting my job and developing my own software. We talked about our regrets and our secret, silly fears. We didn't talk about Jake. We didn't talk about what would happen when the storm ended. We existed solely in that sacred, stolen present, a bubble outside of time. We held on to each other as we finally succumbed to exhaustion, lying side by side on the rug before the dying fire. Not as lover and beloved, not as mother and son's friend, but as two shipwrecked survivors who had found a single, precious piece of driftwood in a boundless, dark ocean. We held on like we were both afraid to let go, because we knew, on some fundamental level, that once we did, the spell would be broken, and the real world would come crashing back in. Her head was on my shoulder, her hair tickling my chin, her hand curled trustingly in mine. And as I drifted into the most peaceful sleep I'd ever known, I understood that this night, this single, impossible night, had already changed everything. The return of the world was brutal. It came not with a gentle dawn, but with a sudden blinding sunrise that pierced the cabin windows like a shard of glass. The storm was over. The world was buried under 3 feet of snow, pristine and silent, but the fury had passed. The spell was broken. We woke tangled together, and for one blissful, disoriented moment, I thought it was a dream. Then I felt her stir against me, felt the soft weight of her head on my chest, and the memory of the night before flooded back with the force of a tidal wave. Our eyes met. There was a moment of pure, unvarnished connection, and then, just as quickly, the reality of our situation descended, and with it, a palpable wave of guilt and fear. We untangled ourselves without a word. The air was thick with everything we couldn't say. A few hours later, we heard the grinding roar of a snowplow. Then, the crunch of tires on the packed snow. A knock on the door. A grim-faced sheriff's deputy stood there, his nose red from the cold. "You folks okay in here? We've got a Jake Morrison in town who's been driving us crazy, worrying about you." The bubble had not just been popped, it had been annihilated. The journey back to Denver was a study in surreality. The deputy drove us down the mountain in his heated SUV, the radio chattering with mundane police codes. The world outside the window was once again familiar, ordered, and mundane. Inside the car, the silence between Sonia and me was a living, breathing entity. We were reunited with Jake at a small clinic in the mountain town. He had a bandage on his nose and fingertips from the frostbite, but his spirit was, of course, undimmed. "Mom, Leo, you guys are okay." He engulfed his mom in a bear hug, then pulled me into one. "Man, I was so worried. I shouldn't have left you. That was so stupid." "It's okay, honey," Sonia said, her voice back to its familiar, maternal tone. But her eyes, when they met mine over Jake's shoulder, were full of a shared, secret storm. "You're safe. That's all that matters." The drive back to the city was quiet. Jake, hopped up on painkillers and adrenaline, talked nonstop about his epic survival tale, about the guy in the Raptor who saved him, about the hospital food. Sonia and I sat in the back seat together, a chasm of unspoken words between us. I stared out the window, the streets of Denver glowing under the soft, indifferent yellow of the streetlights, as if nothing had happened, as if my entire universe hadn't been realigned in a single night. When we dropped her off at her house, she gave me a look that was a mixture of apology, regret, and a lingering, desperate heat. "Thank you for everything, Leo," she said, her voice formal and final. "Anytime, Sonia," I replied, my own voice just as steady, just as hollow. As I left Jake's house, he called after me. "Hey, you sure you're okay? You've been weird since the trip." I turned, meeting his eyes the eyes of my best friend, and for a heart-stopping second, I wondered if he could see it. If he could see the ghost of his mother's kiss on my lips, the memory of her body curled against mine in the firelight. A wave of guilt, hot and sharp, washed over me. I was betraying him with every breath I took that still carried her scent. "Yeah," I said, my voice miraculously steady. "Just tired." But as I walked to my car, the weight of that night settled deeper into my bones, a quiet ache that wouldn't leave. It was a physical presence, a new organ that throbbed with a mixture of euphoria and despair. The following days turned into weeks, and the ache didn't fade. I kept coding, kept going for runs through City Park, kept living the life I had built, but it was like moving through a thick fog. Everything was blurred at the edges. Nothing felt quite solid. The vibrant colors of my life had been dialed down to a monotonous gray. I was going through the motions, a ghost in my own life. I didn't try to contact her. I told myself it was for the best. That whatever had happened in that cabin was a moment born of extreme circumstances and shared vulnerability. A beautiful, painful anomaly. Not a promise. To pursue it would be to betray Jake in the most fundamental way possible, to shatter our friendship and her relationship with her son. It was an impossible situation. But my mind was a traitor. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her. Her green eyes catching the firelight. Her voice, soft and raw, saying she wanted to be seen. I felt the phantom pressure of her hand curling into mine. I saw the way she'd smiled when I draped my jacket over her shoulders. It wasn't just the kiss. It was the intimacy, the profound, soul-deep recognition. For one night, I hadn't been the steady friend. I had been Leo, the man who saw Sonia, the woman, and she had seen me. The memory was both a comfort and a torture. It was the only thing that felt real in the fog, yet it was the very thing that ensured I could never fully return to my old life. One evening, about 2 months after the trip, I came home from a run. It had been a bad day. The fog was particularly thick. I had been debugging a piece of code for 8 hours, the characters on the screen swimming before my eyes. The run was a punishment, an attempt to outpace my own thoughts. I arrived at my apartment building, my lungs burning, my shoes caked with mud from the park's trails, my body exhausted but my mind still racing. And then I saw it. A small, square package on my doorstep, wrapped in plain brown paper. No label, no postage, no note on the outside. It hadn't been mailed. It had been delivered by hand. My heart stuttered. A frantic, wild bird trapped in the cage of my ribs. I knew, with a certainty that defied all logic, who it was from. I picked it up. It was light, but the weight felt deliberate, significant. Inside my apartment, with hands that were not quite steady, I tore the paper open, and there it was. Her red scarf. The one she'd worn on the drive up to the cabin. Neatly folded, the soft crimson wool a stark, beautiful slash of color against the dull gray of my kitchen counter. I stood frozen, just staring at it, as if it were a holy relic. Slowly, almost reverently, I brought it to my face, my eyes closing involuntarily. I inhaled deeply. It was still there. The faintest, most precious trace of her perfume, the scent of pine needles and rich coffee that was so uniquely her. It was the scent of the cabin, of the fire, of that night. It was the scent of being seen. A wave of emotion so powerful it nearly buckled my knees washed over me. It was a punch of longing, of desire, of a connection that had been severed but clearly had not died. Tucked inside the folds was a single piece of paper. I unfolded it with trembling fingers. Her handwriting was clean and careful, elegant and unhurried. Not the last night, but not the first either. I know I can knock if I need to. I read it once, twice, a dozen times. I stood there, holding the scarf in one hand and the note in the other, my pulse a loud, rhythmic drum in my ears. It wasn't an invitation, not exactly. It wasn't a declaration of love. It wasn't a promise of a future. But it was something. A door left deliberately, carefully cracked open, a possibility, a thread, thin but strong, connecting our two separate worlds. She hadn't forgotten. She hadn't dismissed it as a mistake. The night had left its mark on her, too. It had been real for her, just as it had been for me. She was telling me that she carried it with her, that it existed as a tangible thing between us, a shared secret that was both a burden and a treasure. And she was giving me hope, a fragile, dangerous, intoxicating hope. I pressed the scarf to my face again, breathing her in, and for a glorious, painful moment, I was back there. Her head on my shoulder, the fire crackling, the world held at bay by walls of snow. The note wasn't a promise, but it was enough. It was a balm and a blade. It told me I hadn't been a supporting character in that story. I had been the story. I didn't see Sonia again for a while after that. Life, in its relentless, mundane way, kept moving. Jake got a promotion at work and started talking seriously about moving to Seattle for a bigger role. He was excited, and I did my best to be the supportive best friend, listening to his plans, helping him research neighborhoods, all while a part of me screamed in silent protest. I threw myself into a new, complex coding project, something that consumed my waking hours and kept me up late enough to quiet the constant, whispering thoughts of her. But I kept the scarf. I folded it carefully and placed it on a shelf in my bedroom, next to a stack of books I never got around to reading. It wasn't a trophy. It wasn't a desperate keepsake. It was a reminder, a testament that some moments don't need to last forever to matter. They don't need to be the beginning of a grand romance to be profound. They just need to happen. They need to be true. Sometimes, on nights when the silence in my apartment felt too heavy, I'd drive by Jake's house. Not to stop, never to stop, just to see if her car was in the driveway. Most times it was a familiar sedan parked under the street lamp, and I'd feel a strange, complex mix of relief and longing. Just knowing she was there, breathing the same city air, was a strange sort of sustenance. It was enough, even if I couldn't reach her. Once, I saw her. It was a warm spring evening, and she was in the front yard, watering the flower beds with a hose. Her hair was tied back in a simple ponytail, and she was wearing jeans and a faded t-shirt. Her movements were slow, deliberate, peaceful. She didn't see me, and I didn't stop. I just slowed the car for a fraction of a second, my foot hovering over the brake. But I smiled. I smiled because she looked okay. Not ecstatically happy, maybe, but steady, grounded, like she was patiently, methodically finding her way back to herself. The sight of her, living her life, filled me with a profound sense of peace. The truth, which settled over me as gradually and surely as the Colorado dusk, was that I didn't need her to knock. I didn't need us to try and pick up where we left off, to steal more forbidden moments, or make promises we could never hope to keep in the harsh light of day. The world we lived in, the world with Jake in it, was a different world from the snowbound cabin. Some fires are meant to burn bright and hot, but not forever. That night in the cabin had given me something I hadn't even realized I was starving for. A glimpse of what it felt like to be truly needed. Not for my stability, not for my coding skills, but for my soul. To see someone else's walls come down, brick by painful brick, and to know they trusted you enough to catch them when they fell. Sonia had shown me that, not just in her words or her touch, but in the way she had let me see her, really see her, without any of the masks she wore for the world. And in doing so, she had given me the courage to see myself. I don't know if our paths will cross again, not in the way they did that night. Maybe she'll stay Jake's mom, the elegant woman who waves politely when I drop by to watch a game. Or maybe, one day, years from now, when the dust has settled and Jake is happy in his new life, she'll knock on my door, and we'll sit down with cups of tea and find out what comes next for two people who once knew each other in the raw. But for now, I carry that night with me, not as a heavy weight of regret or a burning torch of hope, but as a warmth, a small, steady, internal fire, banked but never extinguished. It was like the fire we built together. It didn't last forever, but it kept us alive through the long, cold dark. It showed us who we could be. It wasn't about love in the way people write songs about all grand gestures and sweeping orchestras. It was quieter, messier, more real. It was about two people finding a moment of profound truth in the middle of their respective storms, not because they had to, but because, against all odds and reason, they chose to. One quiet evening, I took the red scarf down from the shelf. I unfolded it, the soft wool whispering secrets against my skin. I pressed it to my face one more time. The scent, now faint, almost imaginary, a memory of a memory. Then I folded it again with deliberate care and placed it back on the shelf, the note tucked safely inside its folds. And I smiled, not because I had her, but because I had known her. I had seen her and she had seen me. Even if it was only for a single, frozen, perfect moment in time, we had been real to each other. That was enough. For now, it had to be. Bye-bye.